Welcome to the NBA Trades Podcast. I'm your host, Raphael, and I'm here in snowy New York talking about some trades. The trade deadline is coming up in a month, and I have a really special guest. It's the bro, Anthony Canton, AC Spotlight, 9'5", regular appearer on the podcast. Anthony, how are you doing today?
What's happening, man? How's it going? Happy to be on.
Thanks for coming on. So yeah, how are you dealing with the snow? I know it's been a lot, and there's all that snow and shoveling. New York City, buried under the snow. Actually, it was. I mean, it was high, but it wasn't that high.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously today it's freezing.
I know it's been so cold.
Yeah. So a lot of it's ice out there. But, yeah, you manage, man. Just snowed in, just chilling for the weekend.
Just chilling, putting up Netflix and just watching a bunch of stuff, right?
Basically, absolutely. That's what's happening.
Okay, so, I have you here on the podcast to talk about the trade deadline, the NBA trade deadline. We did it last year, a month before the trade deadline, or like roughly a month before the trade deadline. We talk about trades we want to see, and we trade a few back and forth. We talked about last year, and I guess it shows you in a time capsule, sort of, the people who are talked about in trades and what ends up happening. So we talked a month before last year's trade deadline, so January of 2017, we spoke about Paul Millsap and the Hawks. What's he going to do? Are the Hawks going to trade him before the deadline and punt on making the playoffs? They obviously chose to keep him, and they made the playoffs, lost in the first round to Washington, and ended up losing him in free agency after they hired new management. Travis Schlenk much gave up on everything, traded Dwight, and they've pretty much tanked this year, going with a very minimal roster, looking to get that top draft pick with Dennis Schroeder leading their team. Sacramento, we talked about DeMarcus Cousins, how he was always in the rumors. He ends up getting traded right after the All-Star game. The week of the trade deadline, leading up to the trade deadline on the Sunday before that Thursday, and he ends up joining New Orleans, playing with Anthony Davis, and it's sort of, I guess you would say, two mixed reviews. They both have played well, but the team has still, been a 500 team just about, with them on the roster together so far in about 11 months of basketball. And then we also talked about a few very small trades. Nothing really happened that we predicted besides the DeMarcus thing, and I don't think we had been saying that New Orleans would be the team to acquire DeMarcus. Looking back on that, what did you think about that whole process last year of just the trade deadline and sort of how many trades happened? I felt like there were a lot more trades that happened than I expected going into.
Yeah, a lot of them happened down the stretch. Particularly, I think the one that was obviously most shocking was the DeMarcus one that happened, as you said, right after the All-Star game. And Millsap didn't get moved. Atlanta stayed focused on wanting to make the playoffs and have a decent season, and he ended up leaving anyway, which is funny when you think about it. When they had certain offers on the table from teams that were interested. Like, I know people thought Toronto might have been in the mix for him, so that would have been interesting if they were able to swing a deal for him. But if you look at Toronto now this season and the way that they're playing with a lot of their young guys in their bench, maybe it was the best move to not go after him, and instead they get Serge Ibaka close to the deadline. So there were a lot of different moves. Of course, we get crazy about any type of trade, even the most minute type of deal, and there wasn't really, besides the Boogie trade, which a lot of people thought that was a fleecing in terms of what the Pelicans gave up to get him, and the pairing with him and Anthony Davis and how that's gone since February of last season. has been interesting to watch. They formed an interesting pairing together. It's just the problem is the roster around them is not that great. So you have that interesting time as we get closer to the trade deadline to see exactly what are teams' mindsets, and particularly this year and kind of going through the trades, possible potential trades, is thinking more along the lines of, man, how the center market is so diluted because we league that they're moving away from the back to the basket, slow plotting center. So it's going to be really hard to get rid of those guys. A lot of centers who I'm sure some teams would like to trade.
I agree. I think that's sort of become the biggest thing in the league is that, you have a lot of capable centers. It's not that they can't play. It's just that the way that the style of basketball has changed. There's only 48 minutes on a court and for every position. And so if you're playing small, there's only so many minutes for a starting center and there's only so many minutes for a reserve center. So it makes it a lot more complicated. And you're seeing a lot of teams like Denver with Kenneth Faried, to the Knicks with their mix of, four centers and having Kristaps Porzingis on the roster. You're finding it, for to get these big men on the court, unless, you're playing more of a traditional team like the Spurs who play two bigs, or OKC. They sort of play traditional with Adams, but then even on the bench they don't really play a center. Jeremy Grant and Patrick Patterson play together, so it's sort of complicated, and it's tricky in terms of allocating how much money a lot of these guys have gotten. Sort of like you see with Orlando, Bismack Biyombo getting paid $17 million a year, and he really only barely plays, and now he's playing when Vucevic is out, but it's sort of like, pay him that much to play 20 minutes or 18 minutes a game. So it makes it very tough. So for this podcast, we're going to talk about, trades that we want to see happen. So we're going to trade back and forth, 3 trades each. I came up with 3 trades. Anthony came up with 3 trades. So let's get it going. I'll start. The first trade that I thought of, and I think this is probably the bigger one, or the biggest one that I could think of, is this one. The breakdown is the Clippers, Wizards, and Bulls in a 3-team trade. So the Clippers trade DeAndre Jordan to the Wizards. The Wizards trade Marcin Gortat, an 18 first-rounder, to the Clippers. The Bulls trade Quincy Pondexter to the Clippers. The Wizards trade to Chicago Markieff Morris and a heavily protected 2020 first-round pick. And then that's the trade. So my thinking behind it is this. So DeAndre Jordan is in a really complex situation. He's an upcoming free agent. He's expecting to secure the bag, get that bag, that big contract, that $200 million possibly or whatnot. And after the Clippers after Chris Paul left, I think everyone now knows the Clippers are not contenders. So it makes it very tricky because do you really want to invest that much money in a Blake Griffin and DeAndre Jordan pairing long term when both guys are approaching 30 and both guys proven that their pairing is good, it works together, but is it really going to take you to the promised land? And I don't think that it will, and I think the Clippers, out of fear of just losing him for nothing, I just feel like the Clippers have to deal him at the trade deadline because he can opt out of his contract this summer, which, I would expect him to because he's still playing well. I think he's averaging 12 points and 15 rebounds. He's still a stout defender. He's not blocking shots like he used to, but he still affects that, and he lobs and he can finish, and he's shooting better from the free throw line. So you can keep him on the court a little bit more than compared to 2 years ago when everyone was fouling on purpose. Everybody at that point. For the Clippers, I feel like adding Marcin Gortat at least keeps them competitive for right now because I do think that they're still in that position where they want to be competitive with Blake Griffin. Marcin Gortat still has 2 years left, so you keep him for a little bit longer. He's still productive center. Not the rim protector DeAndre is, but still a very good rebounder. And fits today's NBA in that type of 4 out, 1 in. And, maybe him and Blake, it's not ideal compared to DeAndre with his ability to catch lobs and whatnot and his athleticism. But still, I think that could work. And they get a first round pick for it. I think that that's the best that they could do right now. I don't think that they really can get much for him at this point because of his expiring contract or the chance of him opting out situation going on.
Right.
For the Wizards, I felt that I think the interesting thing I found is that it's just very hard to find teams with cap space. The Bulls are one of the few teams with a lot of cap space, so I figured they assume the contract of Markieff Morris and get a first round pick in return for Quincy Pondexter, who's an expiring contract. Markieff Morris has a negative .5 net rating per 100 possessions this year. Obviously, he missed the first few weeks with an injury. And the starting lineup with Morris, so the four starters, Bradley Beal, John Wall, Gortat, and Otto Porter with Markieff Morris, have been good, a plus 4.8 points per 100 possessions. But the starting lineup with Oubre instead of Markieff Morris is a plus 20.4 points per 100 possessions. So I feel like they probably should move on. Mike Scott has been pretty good as a backup power forward. So why not start Oubre? Obviously, it takes a little bit away from your bench, but you might as well get the most out of your team and play the best. Maybe they could make another move at the deadline and try and acquire a wing to sort of fill in where Oubre comes in as a starter. That's my thinking behind the trade. What do you think about that one?
Well, I like the idea of DeAndre Jordan in Washington with a potential alley-oop combination with him and John Wall. Obviously, the athleticism is still there, and he's still very productive, even as he gets up there and getting closer to 30 years old. But still, I think in a time where the Wizards don't exactly have a lot of flexibility to do much in the free agent market for the next couple of years, I think this is the type of move that you will make. Gortat's a little older, and as much of a symmetry that he has and as much of a chemistry that he has with John Wall in the pick and roll, and their chemistry is great, and obviously he's been on the team for a number of years, they may need some fresh blood, and this may be the perfect rental to just see, hey, maybe we could push ourselves to the conference finals this season. So I like that aspect for Washington. In terms of Chicago, Morris would be interesting with that motley crew, considering Mirotic and Bobby Portis.
Yeah.
And Lauri Markkanen in there, so it'll be like a little logjam of stretch fours. So that would be kind of funny to see if something like that happened. And then for the Clippers, Marcin Gortat, I'm not sure exactly what that would mean. It will probably weaken the Clippers this year for sure. I love the chemistry that Blake and DeAndre do have when they're out there together on the court. So they'll miss that. They get a little older and a little slower and a little less athletic. So I don't know if they're going to make the playoffs. They're in the mix for one of the last two spots with them coming on as of late. And Lou Williams going crazy and Blake back. So, they may want to continue to try and compete. And I'm not sure whether Gortat would be the answer if they were trying to do that. But if they want to not lose DJ for nothing, and then on top of that, get back a contract that's towards the end, then you can make the case for it. So, doesn't sound too crazy.
Yeah, I could see it happen. Actually, probably not. But I could see it, sort of. I don't know. I feel like the Clippers still are holding on to trying to compete. And obviously, there's no teams really with cap space to just absorb his salary. So it would be cool, though, to see the Wizards with DeAndre and John Wall. I think that would be a very cool partnership. Let's move on to you. What's your first trade?
First trade? I'm trying to think. Which one should I go with first? Because I have three. I say they get bold. They continue to try and get bold. They trade Chris Middleton, and they also trade Teletovic. It's just the obvious fact that when you play two guards who, as great offensively as they are just so deficient defensively, and that doesn't obviously take into account the fact that the Blazers have been a top 5 defensive team in defensive rating this season.
So that's
So
why
I
I'm wondering.
But I say that, but also say that with those two together, I think at some point they have to come to the conclusion that I don't think you could play with both of them forever. And on top of that, both of them are, they get in a couple of years they'll be up there in age. So I don't think you're going to trade Dame. I think Dame is the heart and soul of that team, and I think he's the leader of that team. And I wouldn't trade him anyway. I also think he's the better player. So if I were to trade one of them, I would trade C.J. McCollum, and you get a first-round pick. You get Chris Middleton, who you could slot at the 2-guard position, and I obviously not changed. Dame would be number one, but I think Chris Middleton is a very capable second banana. And then you have Nurkic, and we'll see what happens with Nurkic and whether they resign him. And then you have Teletovic on the floor for extra shooting if you want to go with him at the 4 at certain instances. Yes, you lose some stuff defensively, but Chris Middleton, I think, would help not only on the wing defensively, but he'd be a capable scorer with still some upside. So that, from Portland's standpoint, I think that'd be an interesting trade to make. And then from Milwaukee's standpoint, you add a very capable scorer, somebody who could space the floor, somebody also who you're interchangeable from a ball handling standpoint with Bledsoe and Giannis as well, just to take more of the pressure off, because still you get the feeling that they do still play in a crowd. And of course, this would probably marginalize Brogdon, but if it's CJ McCollum, hey, I'm not hating on it. And then, of course, you got CJ locked up for a couple more years, so you're in good shape with still a relatively young player and a guy who could make an impact potentially in the playoffs if they were able to get things together. So that's the trade. CJ McCollum to the Bucks for Mirza Teletovic, Chris Middleton, and a 2020 first rounder.
Interesting. I think it's a different trade. The only thing, like you said, like Portland and you don't think that the two of them can sort of play, or like that they could win with the two of them as their like best players, or like together, the Lillard McCollum thing. The only thing I feel like Portland and Milwaukee. I guess this will bleed into me because it's funny. I actually did a Portland Milwaukee trade, which is hilarious.
Really?
Yeah, but it was a lot smaller, and it was different, and definitely smaller in scale and size and impact. I think that the problem is more so we'll never know how Lillard and McCollum play together on a very good team, or if they can play together on a good team, because they've surrounded them with players that don't really fit particularly well. I think Al-Farouq Aminu and Mo Harkless are both very good defensive wings, but they both can't shoot, and so teams just ignore them. And Evan Turner, I guess, is in the same boat too, is that they ignore them, and it makes it a lot harder for Portland to have a very good offense. And I think that's sort of what has happened with their team this year, and why their offense has flipped, and their defense has really flipped too in a positive direction. So for me, the trade that I made was Mo Harkless to Milwaukee for Matthew Dellavedova, straight up, like Paula Abdul, wow. Straight up. Both guys have 3 years left on their deal. Delly makes $9.6 million. Mo Harkless makes about $10.2 million. I think it really wouldn't solve anything. I think both teams would still be average. But I made the trade just because I was sort of like, okay, these two teams are very average. They need to make some kind of move because they're not going anywhere. Delly, I think, he fits sort of the thing about defense, but he hasn't shot well like he did when he was in Cleveland a couple years ago. And it's just sort of made him a very, mediocre player. When he was shooting well in Cleveland a couple years ago, it sort of made him into what people thought that he could make that kind of money. And now his contract sort of looks a little ridiculous. I think Mo Harkless he's a very long wing. He can defend. He's multi-positional, multifaceted. He could play different positions. He could play small forward. He plays a lot of power forward for the Blazers. But I think, like you said, the Lillard McCollum thing hasn't worked. I think the Aminu Harkless thing hasn't worked in Portland because it's just they're two guys who are not very good on anything specifically offensively. Aminu can get hot from three and he'll hit some, but then he'll go into a really big slump. Harkless shot decently, 35%. Obviously, that was the big thing last year with his with the clause in his contract, the bonus clause. But this year he's shooting under 30. It's just he's had the two guys who have never been consistent 3-point shooters, and teams are very willing and open to let them shoot as much as they want to and prevent Lillard and McCollum. So I think that the Blazers just need to move on from that pairing because anytime, I mean, I remember specifically, and I guess in some ways it maybe it blinded the Blazers, but in 2016 when they made the second round, they beat the Clippers. But the first two games of that series, I remember before Blake and Chris Paul got hurt, the Clippers pretty much blitzed Damian Lillard and McCollum on their pick and rolls and said, okay, Aminu, Harkless, you could shoot as much as you want to. And they did, and the Blazers lost both games. So they got lucky, and Blake and Chris Paul got hurt, and they were able to win the series and beat the Clippers and get to play Golden State, and Aminu had a really big series against Golden State, even though the Blazers lost. And I think it sort of erased that this pairing just never really, like, while it helps defensively and it sort of covers up some of the deficiencies that Lillard and McCollum have, not being long or not being tall defenders, that, you have two really long guys who can switch and can move into different positions in Aminu and Harkless. It's still, their offense is just very ugly, and teams can game plan for it too easily. So I just felt, why not trade Mo Harkless and just get rid of it and try and start over in terms of your wing rotations and try and add some, in the future, add some spacing and some perimeter shooting on the wing. From Milwaukee's side, I felt, Dellavedova, what's the point? Like, he's a good defender, but at the same time, he's not shooting well. And I think with Eric Bledsoe and Malcolm Brogdon's presence on the team and Giannis's ability to handle the ball, I think, do you really need an extra point guard? Not really. You could just have Bledsoe or Brogdon in at all times. And even if, like, there's that chance that one of them's not playing, you have Giannis who can pretty much play point guard. You could play wings with him, play Chris Middleton and Tony Snell. So I just felt there's no need for Dellavedova. Get him out of here. And, I mean, it would be hard for Dellavedova to play in Portland because Shabazz Napier has stepped up and played very well this year and has sort of assumed that backup guard role, the interchangeable three-man rotation with Lillard and McCollum. So it's going to be that was a trade that I just can't. I don't know. It's just hard. It's just two mediocre teams who need to shake things up. That's what I think.
I feel you. I feel you on that one.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm up next. I have a second trade. I'll save my monster trade for last. But this trade is Utah trading Marcus. I mean, no, wrong teams. Excuse me. This is who they're being traded to. Utah getting rid of Derek Favors, trading him to the Boston Celtics for Aaron Baines and Marcus Morris. Now, the reasoning behind this trade, I think Boston, they've played incredibly well. They're 31-10. They've been pretty good defensively. They've been better offensively than people would have expected without Gordon Hayward. I think the issue that they've had people have talked about whether it's they play too many games and in a condensed schedule and stuff like that, but they've had issues, and one of their biggest issues is rebounding. And as good as Al Horford is as an all-around type of player, I feel like you need somebody who you can go to as a backup who can kind of like provide those same similar all-around, not only defense, but of course rebounding. Rebounding is very important, and I think Utah, with obviously Rudy Gobert in the fold for the next 4 to 5 years with his contract extension, Favors would seem like the odd man out, and they would kind of need to change how they play in terms of that Favors Gobert pairing. I think has lived out its life, and I think it's time for a change. And of course, they're probably going to lose him after this year anyway, and they're probably going to go in a different direction. So, if that's the case, make a trade. And I think Boston is a good place. You get Marcus Morris, who can kind of stretch the floor, the floor at the 4 position, and Aaron Baines, who's played well for the Celtics this year. Don't get me wrong, but I do think that Derek Favors for the Celtics is an upgrade as a rental, and I don't think you necessarily lose anything by losing Marcus Morris, because you are building around your 2 wings in Brown and Tatum. And, of course, eventually Gordon Hayward next season will come back. So I'm looking at this, particularly this season, if you get Favors on the Celtics and then you have him as Horford's backup, and just in a pinch, if you need to play them together, then you can. Horford can still shoot threes. But at the same time, I think Favors would be a nice defensive upgrade in the front court, and would give them a better shot to compete on the glass against some of the better rebounding teams. Whenever they play Cleveland, Wednesday night notwithstanding, they have a lot of trouble with Tristan Thompson on the boards. And I think Favors would help against that type of situation. So, for Utah and Boston, Boston trades Marcus Morris and Aaron Baines to Utah, and Boston gets Derek Favors.
Interesting. I mean, he is an expiring contract, and you have to wonder if Utah wants to keep him, meaning Derek Favors, because I think with Gobert's presence, it makes it really tough, to find playing time for them. When Gobert was healthy and he was playing, it felt like a very tricky pairing, because they would sort of take Gobert out early and then put Favors in, and then they would play like a little, or they would start together, and they would take Favors out early and put Jonas Jerebko, and then put Favors in as the center, and then he'd play most of the early part of the second quarter, the late part of the first quarter, and then Gobert would come back, and they tried to make a tricky fit where Gobert and Favors really only would play 6 or 7 minutes together. And I guess I could see, if his contract is expiring, why not? Marcus Morris, he's been injured much of this year with a knee problem. Well, not much as he's playing 20 games, but he's missed about, half of the season. He's shooting 35% from 3, so, he is a somewhat capable shooter. He's more of an isolation player. He could create his own shot. I could see it working. Why not? Yeah, his contract expires in next year, 2018-19 season, where he makes $5.375 million. Yeah, I could see. I mean, why not? I think Aaron Baines has been serviceable for Boston, but Derek Favors adds a little oomph as a pick and roll center. He's more of a pick and roll guy than Aaron Baines. Aaron Baines is more of a traditional. He's not like a quick moving guy. So, yeah, interesting. Okay, so I guess we'll go to the last trade. So mine is the Knicks, Courtney Lee. I've been saying it. I know Terrence Ferguson has been balling out for OKC the past couple games in Los Angeles, but the Thunder still, I feel, need a two-way guard to complement their big three. And this one I found particularly hard to do because OKC really has 4 big salaries in Carmelo, Paul George, Steven Adams, and Russell Westbrook. And then no one else is really making much money. So my trade is this. Courtney Lee, he's owed $23.4 million over the next 2 years, which are the 2 last years of his 4-year deal he signed with the Knicks. The Knicks trade him to OKC. The Thunder trade Alex Abrinas and a 2020 second-round pick to the Knicks. I also involve Sacramento in this because Sacramento is the team that would help facilitate the deal because they have the cap space. Without them, this wouldn't work. The Thunder trade Kyle Singler, who's owed $9.4 million over 2 years, and won heavily, and when I say heavily, lottery protected 2022 first round pick to the Kings. The Kings trade Malachi Richardson to the Knicks. With their schedule, how they're playing, it's going to be very, very tough. Why not sell? Be sellers at the trade deadline. You're not going to make the playoffs. Courtney Lee doesn't really, and he just doesn't fit with the mid-20s, early 20s of the Knicks. But I couldn't see them giving up a first-round pick for Courtney Lee. Because while he's good, he sort of leaves his limitations in terms of being able to play multiple positions, defend multiple positions. And while I think he's a good player, I just think that like the Knicks need to just move on from the Courtney Lee era. Even though I think he has played well for them, they need to just accept that they are not going to be much more than, fighting for the playoff spot at this point, the last playoff spot. But it's going to be very hard in the last half of the season. I felt like why not the Knicks get, a young guy in Alex Abrinas who at times really just generally hasn't played well, hasn't been able to expand his game because obviously he's playing with three ball-dominant players. And I said Malachi Richardson. He hasn't really played much for the Kings, and so why not? I mean, I don't know. I'm not an insider. I'm not Woj, so what do I know? But that was my trade, my thinking. The Knicks need to move on and just say, hey, we're not going to be good.
I think Oklahoma City definitely would be helped out by Courtney Lee, and I think obviously that's the main cog in this trade, and another good perimeter guy who could, he's shown a lot more capability of doing stuff on the ball this season. You obviously don't want to have him on the ball all the time. And,
as we've seen with the Knicks,
he's gonna be he can spot up, shoot, and just a nice little safety valve and somebody who you could play in a conceivable lineup that would not kill your spacing, and he'd actually be pretty good. So. I like that deal. So, the big monster last trade that I have. So I've been thinking about this, and at first I thought earlier that the Pelicans should think about just trading Boogie Cousins at some point. He's probably going to leave after this season, one would assume, with all of New Orleans' issues and the fact that the roster isn't that great, but. If I'm New Orleans, I think, I know I have two great players, two great big men, two versatile perimeter shooting. Anthony Davis, clearly a perimeter shooter. Not only that, but his all-around ability and the ability to play defense, the athleticism, everything else. But. Man, at the same time, you have to think of, is he going to be gone? Is he going to follow along the lines of all of these guys who've been on these small market teams, all of these stars who have, once they sign that second contract, the clock starts on whether they're going to leave or not. So, if I'm New Orleans, I decide to just go ahead and start the rebuilding process immediately. I start now. I don't wait. So, I decide not to trade Boogie Cousins. I don't know what's going to happen with him in the offseason. But
you're only trading Anthony Davis?
No, this is the start. This is like the first
I'm
move.
a little scared, but let me
This is
stop.
the first move.
I'll listen.
We probably don't have enough time to go through all the things that they need to do, but
we have enough time.
I would trade Anthony Davis, and I would trade him to the Cleveland Cavaliers for Kevin Love and the Brooklyn pick that the Cavaliers have at their disposal. I consider the fact that even though the Nets have been, not awful, that they're going to eventually end up with one of, probably a top 10, or I should say bottom 10 record in the league. And Cleveland obviously is looking to upgrade in any type of way that they can to beat the Warriors. And while they've made some moves this offseason, some you could agree with, some you could disagree with, they have at least Jay Crowder on the wing to help a little bit out. But if you're looking for the elite perimeter big men in the league that could kind of hang with the Warriors and defend multiple positions, who could contend with either Draymond Green at center or even in a pinch could guard Kevin Durant for a couple of possessions, Anthony Davis is your guy. So if I were to make that trade, if I'm the Pelicans, I say to myself, okay, we can sell to the fans at least for the time being. And I know I'm sounding shady when I say all this stuff by saying that, well, we could sell to them for the time being, that we still are competing. And it's always hard to trade a homegrown star that you drafted. But he gone, man. He's not going to be there.
He's going
to be gone.
You think so?
And I'm not saying that I have sources either like Woj. But you can see the tea leaves. You can see the setup in those comments that he made a couple weeks ago. It's going to happen. He's going to be gone. So you might as well start trying to pick up the pieces that are going to be destroyed when he leaves eventually. So instead, be smart. Be proactive. Don't be these other teams that wait till the last minute. Don't wait till the last minute to trade Anthony Davis. Trade him right now and get that Brooklyn pick. Get Kevin Love, and then maybe you can jettison him at some point for something else. There will always, I would guess,
for nothing.
There will be a taker for somebody like him. But at least in the interim, if he's on the Pelicans, he can still provide the same type of spacing for Boogie, so Boogie can still operate down low. And obviously he operates on the perimeter as well. So that would be my trade. And it sounds crazy. But hey, if you're the Pelicans, you got to start somewhere. And I guess this could be a larger conversation in terms of what the Pelicans do need to do at some point eventually. Because as good as those two guys have been, they don't have the flexibility to get better. So if you have to start somewhere, if you're not going to be able to reach the potential that you want with Anthony Davis, unfortunately, because those type of trades don't grow on trees. So
those type of trades don't grow on trees.
That's why you start now, and this is where you start.
Those type of trades do not grow on trees. I don't think they grow at all. But yeah, I think it's interesting. And I think it brings into a larger point. I think it's so hard when that player, I think for franchises in general, whether, Paul George or LeBron, those type of guys who have left their teams or indicated they don't want to be there anymore, it's very hard to let go. And I think, they feel, obviously he's a top 5 to 10 talent. I guess you have to say top 5 talent because he is really that good. And it's so hard to let go because, you want to still be competitive. I mean, they pretty much traded Chris Paul and lucked into that that first overall pick to get Anthony Davis right after. And it really makes it, hard for them because if they lose again and go through more losing in a bad way, then it's going to make it really troubling for New Orleans to keep their fans interested because they have Anthony Davis and DeMarcus Cousins and you still see empty seats.
Yeah.
So it's just like, I don't know. It's gonna be hard to I just can't see them doing it. But it's a fun trade because it would really change the NBA Finals discussion if Anthony Davis and LeBron were playing together. Then you'd be like,
I should say if you're Cleveland, if you're looking for any way to entice.
Oh yeah, to make sure. Yeah.
That is the move right there. If you could ever make that move.
Yeah, he would. I think he would stay. Yeah, I could not see him leaving if Anthony Davis was there. But I don't know. LeBron runs on his own timeline. You know what I mean? That's the hard part. Or he runs on his own. They say time. His own time. Like he runs on his own. Time. Like he does his own thing. He's not gonna. That's the thing. I'm like, it's true. Like I do think Anthony Davis would make him want to stay, but it's like also. This guy does whatever he feels like. Like, he could just be like, no, I want to play with Chris Paul and Carmelo. You know what I mean?
But that's so weird, though. Like, if Anthony Davis is on the Cavs, okay, you have Anthony Davis, and you say, okay, we can run it back next year with maybe Isaiah if depending on how long he plays and whether he stays healthy, maybe we'll take a 1-year deal for short paper or whatever. I know he talked about backing up the Brinks truck, but I just don't think that's realistic with his role and what's going to happen with the rest of the season and how he's gonna play. So I think you can talk those guys if something like that ever happened. I think you could talk all those guys into coming back and maybe LeBron doing another 1-year deal, or something like that to just see. Because it's like I don't know if I see like LeBron signing a long-term deal anywhere anymore. I could just see him doing like 1-year deals with player options and just doing that for the rest of his career.
Yeah, I can see that too, because he wants to put the pressure on whatever franchise he's on to. And I think a lot of that is connected to winning the championship in 2016. It sort of cemented him as this, well, no matter where I go, I'm always going to be in the conversation for, the finals. Or so in a way, it sort of allowed him to have this leverage play to say, hey, make me happy with your moves or whatever moves you choose to make. And that's the only way I'm going to stay with you. And, you got to always be ready as an organization. So we did our 3 trades, each of our 3 trades, and so what do you think will happen at the trade deadline? Will it be a big story or will it be a dud?
So I think you may see some smaller moves, and it's funny because the whole league for the most part is very competitive, and there's a good amount of teams that are in the mix for a playoff spot. So I guess it depends. I am watching the Pelicans, though, to see if they fall off. They had a big win against Utah the other night. But at the same time, if they fall off in the next month or two, will their process change? Will their mindset change in order to make a different type of move? So, we'll see what happens, but I'm not sure exactly if we're going to see something substantial.
Word. So yeah, this. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm excited. For the trade deadline every year, it's always a fun day to see who gets moved or what year Anthony Johnson gets traded for a 2nd-round draft pick, and that's the only trade of the trade deadline. But anyway, this has been the NBA Trades Podcast. I'm your host, Raphael. Thank you for checking it out. You can follow Anthony on Twitter, AC Spotlight 95. Check out his tweets. He loves talking about the NBA and TV shows. What's popping on the tube, or on the Fire Stick, or on the Netflix. So check it out. Check him out on Twitter. His book, Selfish, is also out. Check it out. And yeah, this is the NBA Trades Podcast. Subscribe.
Oh wait, Ralph. One last quick thing. I wanted to just give a quick. Sorry to interrupt your outro, but I wanted to give a quick shout out to Sean Rosales, who actually added one little quick trade about Memphis and Marc Gasol. Essentially, do something to get some new blood in there. And even though Memphis is not talking about doing any types of deals, I think they really should at this point.
Yeah.
I really think that they should.
I don't know. I
know they've been avoiding, and we've read article after article about how they want to they want to try and stay competitive, but it's pretty clear that with Conley in the position that he's in terms of being hurt, and this has now becoming a trend with him. It's unfortunate. You like to see him be healthy, but he has not been for the last couple of seasons. So you have to start thinking forward, and you have to start thinking, man, I know we want to stay competitive with these 2 guys, but they're getting older, and they're on huge deals. So you're not going to be competitive anyway, and you're just kind of like, in a sense, you're kind of wasting away.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think the thing, though, is that other things play a factor into it. They owe a pick to the Celtics, so they can't be bad next year, because then they don't have a draft pick. And so I think that's the bigger thing too. Like this year, they can afford to be bad because they don't owe anyone a pick. But I think next year is why they will keep them, and you won't see him traded because I think that they want to make sure that they're good enough so that they don't owe a pick. I mean, but at the same time, like I do agree with you. At the end of the day, if you owe a pick, you owe a pick. But you don't want to be Brooklyn and be wasting away and having a really bad season and then having nothing to show for it. And I think that is what plays into probably him staying, at least for the next 2 years. The tricky thing is going to be his value will go down as A, he gets older, but also B, his contract, moves over to where we're talking about it expiring soon. And so I don't think teams will want to give up as much for a rental of Marc Gasol compared to 2 years of Marc Gasol, which is where we're at right now. So I do agree, and shout out to your guy, Sean Rosales. That's the biggest thing is that it's not an easy decision. I think that's going to be what we see. I think that they're gonna keep him just because of that. Because they know that if Conley's healthy next year, which obviously, like you said, it's a big if. He's had the Achilles problem for the past pretty much 2 or 3 years lingering, whether it be big like this year or small like last year, where he only missed like maybe 10 or 11 games last year because of it. At the end of the day, if Conley and Gasol are healthy next year, and you never know, they could at least compete for a playoff spot. But I don't know if you want to be stuck in that position just because you want to make sure that the pick you end up having to give to the Celtics is like mediocre rather than like a very good pick. But yeah, it's gonna be really tough.
Yeah, you want to avoid purgatory at all costs.
Yeah.
And you can resume your outro now.
Yeah, so where was I at? NBA Trades Podcast. Subscribe on NBA Trades Podcast on iTunes, on Google Play, on YouTube. We're on YouTube, so subscribe to that too. And where else? Oh, Stitcher. Yeah, that too. So we're everywhere. So you can listen to it. You can also even listen to it on the site, nbatrades.tumblr.com. Follow me on Twitter. I'm always on Twitter with NBA Trades, so NBA_trades. We're on Facebook too, NBA Trades. So, yeah, Kobe. Shout out to Kobe. Okay, so, Andy, thanks for coming on. Peace out.
No problem, man. Appreciate it.